Member for Ryde.
Thank you, Speaker. As I travel around Ryde, I encounter residents, old and young, new citizens and multi-generation locals. From all the diverse backgrounds, they are united in what they tell me. They cannot recall a period where people seemed so determined to dislike each other, so quick to suspect bad faith, and so reluctant to imagine that someone with a different view might still be a reasonable person. I've thought about that question often since, in the context of my broader examination of the broader social impacts and societal impacts of social media, particularly on democracies and the question of polarisation and division. There is a body of evidence, both quantitative and observational, that the platforms which now dominate public conversation are not neutral conduits. They sort, rank and amplify based on what generates the strongest responses. The strongest response is rarely the most measured. It is the angriest, the most aggrieved, the most certain, and the most performative. The result is a public square that systematically rewards a particular style of communication. Calm, careful, qualified, and curious voices do not travel as far. Loud, contemptuous, and absolute voices travel further and faster. Over time, the people who use the platforms most, including many people in public life, learn to speak in the way that will be rewarded. This is not a problem unique to one country. We have seen it in the United States, where successive elections have been fought against a backdrop of online disinformation, foreign interference operations, and conspiracy theories with offline consequences. We have seen it in Brazil, where coordinated networks helped fuel an attempted assault on the country's institutions. We have seen it in Europe, where platforms have struggled, often unsuccessfully, to contain the deliberate manipulation of public opinion in the period before national votes. Australia is not immune. The Voice referendum showed how rapidly misinformation, including AI-generated material, can spread across platforms in the lead-up to a national vote. The Australian Electoral Commission and the Australian Communications and Media Authority have both expressed concern about the resources required to monitor and respond to digital interference. The E-Safety Commissioner has noted that algorithmic amplification, not just human bad actors, plays a meaningful role in spreading harmful content. I think it is worth pausing on the architectural point. These platforms do not simply host content. They make editorial decisions in the form of recommendation systems about what hundreds of millions of users see on any given day. Those editorial decisions are made by code, not by human editors. The code is optimised for engagement, not for truth, civic health, or accuracy. And the consequences of those digital decisions are some of the most consequential in our public life. If a newspaper deliberately suppressed accurate information and instead promoted inflammatory falsehoods, we would treat it as a serious public scandal. When a platform's recommendation system does effectively the same thing, the conversation is much more muted. We accept it because the choices are presented as automatic. But there is nothing automatic about a business model that prioritises engagement over accuracy. Democracies depend on a few quiet conditions. They depend on citizens trusting that elections are legitimate. They depend on a shared baseline of factual reality. They depend on the assumption that people who disagree are usually arguing in good faith. They depend on institutions, including courts, parliaments, electoral commissions, and the public service, being seen as broadly trustworthy, even by people who lose particular contests. Each of these conditions is being placed under pressure by what we now see online. Polls in Australia and overseas show declining confidence in institutions, declining trust in news media, and growing willingness to believe that political opponents are not just wrong, but malevolent. But a meaningful share of it is downstream of the information environment in which most Australians now live. I'm not advocating for heavy-handed regulation of speech. I do not believe that Parliament should be deciding what is true, and I'm sceptical of frameworks that hand that power to the government. But I do believe that transparency is essential. Australians have a right to know how platforms decide what they see, how political advertising is targeted, who is paying for it, and how foreign interference is being detected and addressed. There is a separate conversation to be had on the specific prescription of these challenges, and one that I'm engaging with in my electorate now. Whatever's one view about its specific policy response, the underlying problem will not go away. We will need to dedicate time, deep thinking, and bipartisanship, something the platforms don't themselves reward, if we are to achieve meaningful reform. I've come to think the long-term health of our democracy depends, in part, on whether we can do this and rebuild a public conversation in which the calm middle has the same chance of being heard as the angry extremes. The platforms are not going to do that for us. We will have to insist on it.